Hey, what's going on guys? Shane here, and today we're talking about the boxing stance. Should you stand tall or short, wide or narrow, squared or bladed? Now the answer to that question is yes, you should be using all of them. The real question is, when do you use them? And I'm going to use this video to explain the benefits of each of those stances. Now, quick disclaimer, I am on the train tracks right now. Probably shouldn't be. These particular tracks are no longer in service, but still, they're private property, they're dangerous, so don't get any ideas. I don't want you guys hanging out on the train tracks or training on the train tracks? Pun? Play on words? One of those. What's the difference? Anyway, you guys get the idea. Let's talk about the different stances. Okay, so the reason why I'm on train tracks for this video is because I love the geometry of the rails. It's going to be a great reference when talking about the angles of my feet and of my shoulders. Now right now talking to you, if you were my opponent, I'd be perfectly squared off to you because my toes, my hips, and my shoulders are both facing you. If I were to rotate 90 degrees, now I'm the most bladed that I can be. I'm perpendicular with the rail, or it'd be the same idea as if I was standing both feet on one rail. All right, this is going to be a bladed stance or a side stance. We're talking about kickboxing. Now, any good boxing coach is going to tell you never to be too bladed and never to be too squared, right? Too much open down the center. They're going to have a mix in between. And what they're probably going to have you do is line up the lead toe with the rear heel, all right? Or some variation to that. Now, the other thing that you got to keep in mind is that this is the blading of the hips. I can square the shoulders but keep the hips bladed, right? So you can see the difference of this, perfectly bladed hips and shoulders, or squared shoulders but bladed hips. All right, so that's something to keep in mind. Now, when do you use a squared stance? When do you use a bladed stance? Generally speaking, you're going to use that bladed stance when you want to stay long on the outside, right? You think about the taller fighters, when they want to throw a jab and get right back out. They want to keep the fight long. They're going to be in a more bladed stance. They want to go like this. They want to get two, and they want to get away. And then the fighters that want to get on the inside, or are already on the inside, think about Tyson, think about even Lomachenko and the way that he's able to aggressively move in and change those angles and stances, is going to be more squared when he does it, right? So think about Tyson versus any of his taller opponents. Tyson's very squared because he likes rushing forward and he likes the ability to switch and move his head either side, right? If I'm bladed, it's hard for my head to go over to the lead side. But if I'm halfway there already with my shoulders, it's easier for me to dip or slip out to my lead side. Again, Lomachenko, someone who uses a lot of head movement, likes going side to side from that southpaw stance, constantly switching, whether he's wide or narrow, tall or short, squared or bladed. Again, if he's trying to rush forward and get on the inside, then he's going to square his stance off. And think about just the movement in general, right? Like if I'm running, if I'm sprinting, if I'm trying to advance forward, think about the direction that your toes are facing, right? It's going to be really hard for me to go backwards if my toes are facing forward. But if I'm bladed, it's easy for me to get out or easy to get in, right? Think about a fencer, bang, bang, right? Or a tennis player, when they're trying to get left or right to get to the ball, bang, this way or this way. It'd be really hard for them to go that way if their feet are facing this way, all right? So, generally speaking, when do you use it? If you're trying to stay on the outside, you're going to be a little bit more bladed, and you're going to be using this punch. You're going to be moving forward and back. If you're trying to get on the inside, if you're trying to be a little bit more aggressive, or if the fight has already gotten closer, that's when you can start to square up your stance. Now you have both weapons, both power in both hands, right? I got more power in my left hand. I can really rip these shots, and I'm more defensively sound on the inside. Whereas if I'm here and someone's on the inside, the moment they cut this angle and get over here, no good. I can't hurt them if they're to my backside, but they can hit me, all right? I have to adjust and get to them. So once the fight starts getting closer range, even Floyd who does fight a little more bladed, right, a little bit more long, as soon as that fight gets to the inside, he'll adjust, he'll come here. Once he starts getting more aggressive, his stance will square up so that he can tilt his head on either side, so that he can have power in both hands. So when talking about bladed or squared, those are some things to keep in mind, right? The distance of the fight and the different attacks and defensive options that you have in both of those stances. Okay, now let's talk about a wide stance versus a more narrow stance. Now, what most people will tell you is that a wide stance means more balance, but less mobility, right? It's harder to move around. And that a narrow stance gives you more mobility or agility, easier to move, but less balance, and I'm easily knocked over. Now, there's some truth to this. However, I wouldn't limit it to just those two principles for each. Here's how I teach it, is that a more narrow stance is going to give you more options of where you can place your feet next. There's going to be more steps readily available. Whereas a wide stance, I'm kind of limited to where I can move my feet, right? And they're all valid options. They're all effective options, right? If I'm throwing a probing jab, I'm stepping forward and coming back, or a retreating step where I'm retreating this leg, or maybe a check hook where this foot steps out, or stepping across in the opposite direction across center line. Now, all of those are valid. All of those work. Again, if I'm on the outside, that's perfect. But if I'm trying to switch my stance, if I'm trying to shift forward or run forward, it's going to be easier for me to do that with a more narrow of a stance. Even just think about Ali and that shuffle step. Pretty hard to do that from a wide stance, right? But he would stand tall, especially in his second fight against Joe Frazier. He made great adjustments in that fight, stayed tall. Well, we're going to talk about tall and short, but he stayed narrow with his feet, and he would use his jab, and he would dance around the ring, and then when he wanted to put a little bit more power, then he would sit down into shots, get a little bit wider with his stance, not too wide, because he didn't want to get stuck. So again, think of it like that. When you want more steps, or if you plan on taking more steps, you really want to cut angles, you want to try to get someone's backside, then you want to take those micro steps with a more narrow stance. If you want to stay on the outside and you're going one direction and the opposite direction, and yeah, you can be a little more wide with your stance. Again, look, study fencers and the way that they move, right? They're very wide. They want to step in and get that point, or step out, deflect, parry, and get right back in. Pretty wide of a stance, but they're on a straight line. They're on these railroad tracks. They're not cutting angles left and right. All right, so that's the thing that you got to think about is where are you moving? What is your goal? And are you balanced when doing that? Now we're going to talk about tall and short. Now, should you fight up tall or should you fight short? Now, let me say this first. When I say tall, I don't mean stiff-legged. You should always be in an athletic stance, springing, having a slight bend in your knees. But I'm saying the difference of this and this, right? Fighting tall and fighting low. Now, again, some footage to study is definitely Frazier against Ali. The second fight in particular, you can really see that difference in styles. Frazier is very low, leaping into shots, trying to get on the inside against a taller fighter. Ali, who's narrow, using his jab, and then would, from time to time, step in and let his power fly, sit down a little bit more, widen his stance a little bit more, and then would go right back to dancing around the ring and using that jab. So, that being said, generally speaking, if you're the shorter fighter with the shorter reach, you don't want to be fighting upright, right? You're going to lose that battle if you're going against someone who's got a good jab. If you want to get on the inside, then you want to be lower. You want to get underneath of shots. Again, we're going to have a little bit more of a squared stance so that we can advance forward, bobbing our head left and right or underneath, switching our stance if that's in our arsenal, cutting those angles. And if we're on the outside, we're the taller fighter, and we want to use that height. We want to use our reach. We don't want to come down to their level so that they can land those shots. We want to keep the head further away. So that's something that you'll see from some fighters where they shift the head from either center or forward over that lead leg, and they'll pull it back here, and they'll lift this shoulder high. They'll parry with this hand. They'll have a nice guard with this lead hand here. And this almost creates an illusion like I'm taller than I am, when in reality all I'm doing is just pulling my head back further away from my opponent's hands, right? So I'm back here, back. Now if I narrow up the stance now, I'm even taller. Again, keep an athletic bounce in your stance. And I can always adjust, sit down on my shots when I want a little bit more power. Think about Buster Douglas against Tyson. Think about Lennox Lewis against Mike Tyson, right? With pepper him with jabs. When Tyson would start to go underneath, bang, would sit down a little bit more and let that rear uppercut rip and do some serious damage with that. So these are the different things that you got to keep in mind. You have to understand the benefits, the practicalities of each stance. What are you trying to achieve? So it's okay if you have like a home base or a preferred stance, but you have to know when and why to adjust your stance. Again, some film study, definitely check out Ali and Frazier. Definitely check out Lomachenko's last fight against Teofimo Lopez. You'll be able to see the difference of a more narrow stance in Loma against Teofimo, who had a wider stance, was going to the body a lot, was throwing a lot of power punches. When you lower your body and you're throwing these power shots, it's going to look like a super wide stance. Obviously, he's not hanging out in here the whole fight. He's going to be more narrow, a little more than shoulder width apart. But when you step in and throw that jab, and someone snaps a picture, it's going to look like a super wide stance, right? So a lot of people use that as reference, whether it's Teofimo or Mayweather. They say, look how wide his stance is. Again, that's not his home base. That's in the middle of a jab to the body. He's trying to lower his head, He's trying to get off center line. He's trying to get more power on that, and then he's going to spring right back to here. So again, you can have a preferred stance, but you should be practicing all of these and understand when and why to use them. We rolling? Is this live? Yeah, my camera keeps turning off. I think it's frozen. So I'm gonna wrap up this video on stance and footwork. What's most important is that you are, what am I gonna say? Finish it, ready? What's most important is that you are balanced. I always talk about how my boxing helped with my Muay Thai, but the one thing that I learned in Muay Thai, the most important thing that I learned in Muay Thai is the importance of balance, and that helped my boxing tremendously, tremendously. All right, so what I want you to do is really experiment in these different stances. Like I said, you may have a preferred stance. You like fighting on the outside with a wide stance because you're a taller fighter. That's great. But what happens when someone is aggressive and gets on the inside or gets you against the ropes or initiates the clinch? You have to be comfortable in those positions. The only way to be comfortable is to train them. All right, so again, that works for you. But the one best bit of advice that I've ever gotten was when you're sparring, that's your chance to train and get better at different things. You know what you're good at. Okay, so your first round, you do what you're good at. That's great. Now, round 2, let's go to plan B, or let's work what we're normally not good at. Let's go into a southpaw stance. Let's fight a little bit more squared than we normally do. Let's be a little bit more aggressive. Let's fight on the back foot a little bit more. All right, so take the chance, the time in training to do all the things that are going to happen in a fight when someone tries to throw you off of your game, your normal game. All right, and if you want the drills to be able to practice all of these things at home with a partner or take it to a gym, you got to sign up for FightTips.com. The first 14 days are completely free. We have 8 courses on there, and we have 2 more coming. They're already made. We're just putting them on. We're putting it together now. We got the MMA IQ roadmap. We got the hybrid striking course. We got the footwork shadowboxing program. We got strength and conditioning calisthenic drills coming. We got heavy bag courses coming. And it's all conceptual stuff. It's stuff that's going to get your IQ up so that when you're watching fights, you can better understand what's going on. You can understand the strategies, the game plans, and that when you're in the ring yourself, you're going to be much more prepared. All right, so check it out. Links in the description below. Try the first 14 days completely free. If you don't like it, cancel it. You won't get charged anything at all. All right, until next time, I'm Shane with Fight Tips for the Underdogs.